Hello, welcome. We've got some more people popping in, so we will just give it a few more minutes. Thank you all for joining us today. Start in just a second. While we're waiting, maybe you can drop in the chat where you are joining us from. What part of the country are you in? I always like to know our audience a little bit. Don't be shy. Oh, Atlanta, Vermont. Oh, I know. Wow. All over the place. Nice. Excellent. Oh, Anchorage. Wow. Awesome. Awesome. Good to see. All right. People are still popping in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to share some insights from our 2026 Workforce Skills and Trends Report. We surveyed over 1,000 professionals and we found some common themes that we think will look pretty familiar to most of you. And the big headline is obviously that technology is moving very quickly. AI has changed the game, and at the same time, the workforce skills aren't necessarily moving at the same time. So people are implementing AI, but maybe not adopting it. And so based on our research, we're learning that there are three things that companies and organizations really need to move together in order to win. And that's a combination of technology skills with the leadership skills and process skills to really coordinate. So before I introduce my panelists today, I did want to drop a quick poll. Like I said, we want to hear where you are. Want to know where you are on your adoption journey in your organization. And we will dive into some of these themes that we're seeing with Tynan Fischer, who is our Senior Vice President of Learning and Operations from Educate 360, and Amy Farber, who's the Chief Strategy and Commercial Officer from Educate 360. Thank you so much. Welcome today. We'll jump in just a second, but I did want to bring everyone's attention to the chat. Please ask questions throughout the entire webinar. We will have some time reserved at the end for Q&A, but if you're dropping the questions, we'll monitor them and try and fit them in. And we're going to try and just be very practical, lots of conversations. So we want to hear your input. And then you'll also get a recording of this sent to your email that you registered with afterwards. So don't feel like you need to feverishly take notes. You can reference it afterwards. So it looks like with 70% of people answered, a lot of people are either just starting to experiment or using AI in select teams or workflows. So, a lot of people at the beginning of their journey, and that is not uncommon. We're seeing the exact same thing. Very few people have it embedded into their core operations strategies. So don't worry about that at all. So Amy, I'll start with you. When you are looking at how AI is changing things, what feels different fundamentally right now than in previous digital transformation? Technology has always been changing. What seems different right now at this stage?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Tiffany, thank you so much for having me and Tynan. These are conversations that we have regularly, so we're really excited to have them with you and the broader group here. So to answer your question, what feels fundamentally different now compared to previous waves of digital transformation? And I think it really boils down to the pace of change. It really feels like with AI, everything is changing so quickly. And I think there's very good reason for that. If you kind of look back at prior waves of digital transformation, if you think about kind of the smartphone era, there was a lot of hardware that went into getting people to adopt that, or even the internet era. Like there was, again, a lot of fiber optic cable running and infrastructure and hardware that needed to go into place to make adoption feasible. With AI, the current wave of digital transformation, so much of that foundation is already built. And given that, AI is a software-driven innovation, it really accelerates the rate at which people can adopt it and it can change. And so I think that has been what's so fundamentally different right now, and where we see our customers coming to us being like, I don't even know which model I should be using anymore because they just keep announcing new ones and there's new features and it's a lot. It's a lot to come up with. And so, as we think about how that translates in some of our customer organizations, it's really not that the technology isn't changing fast enough. That is changing, and that's going to continue to change. It's everything around it that is having trouble keeping pace with that rate of technological change. So it's the people, the operating models. It's a lot to absorb this new tool and technology, this new software, and make it really successful in that organization. And so that's kind of some of the patterns that we're starting to see in our customers. And when we speak to them, they often are gung ho. They're ready to deploy the tools, the new technology, whether it's Copilot or an enterprise ChatGPT license or a Gemini rollout. But the adoption and execution kind of lag. So there's sort of three common profiles of organizations that we see. The first is what we call digital disconnect. And this is based on some research we did earlier in the year. So there's strong leadership buy-in, from the top down. They're saying we need to go, we're an AI forward organization, but actually the technology isn't quite there yet. They want to do it, but they don't know exactly what they should be implementing and to what parts of the organization and how quickly. So that's when there can be a little bit of a digital disconnect. The vision is there, the technology is not quite. Then there are other organizations where we see that there's a bit of kind of chaotic innovation. So they've bought the enterprise license, the leadership's bought in, but there's not a lot of process or project management to inform the rollout, to inform the true adoption in a way that makes people want to turn to and use these tools on a consistent basis. So it can be very chaotic. And then the third type is really this notion of sort of disengaged execution, where they've got the enterprise license, the technology is in place, they've decided where they're going to pilot it and how they're going to, have change agents throughout their organization. But leadership is not quite there in terms of buy-in. And so there's these pockets of the organization where you have big champions of AI, often in an IT function that's realized the potential and the power of this tool, but the leadership isn't, making the space and time from a change management perspective to really bring it to life. So yeah, there's a lot that's changing. It's not just the technology that's changing. It's the people and processes that surround that new technology that really have to be in place to make adoption successful from our perspective.
That's a great point. The technology is only as good as the skills that people have to use it. And so it just makes a really good point that you can have technology skills, you can have technology implementation, but unless you have the process skills to formally introduce it and how you're going to use it, as well as your leadership saying, hey, we're excited about this, we're going to help you, we're going to coach you, we're going to really give you the tools. So I'm interested in the chat if you guys are feeling this in your organizations, and if there's one critical thing that stood out and what's maybe lacking in your AI adoption. Is it leadership buy-in? Is it the actual tools, or is it the process and understanding the responsibility and how you're supposed to use it? Tynan, how are you seeing this show up when you talk to customers in real challenges and conversations they're having around skills development?
First, it's great to see everybody. Thanks for joining us today. In our discussions that we're having with our clients and the companies that we work with, there definitely is a pattern that has emerged. And so parts of it is not unusual, right? I mean, it usually starts off with there's some sort of technology investment, and then that technology investment follows with the training on that technology. So that's not the uncommon part. What I think is a little bit more uncommon is the approach that people are taking with AI today. And I don't know if it's because they're looking at the simplicity of the interface and it has this like Google-esque kind of feel where it's just a bar and just type in the bar and talk to it and all your dreams will come true. Um, and I think maybe we're oversimplifying it a little bit. And so the types of training that we're seeing is, hey, watch this video, or hey, come to this lunch and learn, or maybe there's a little bit more formal type training that's being done, but it's missing the mark. And I think it's missing the mark because it's not taking into consideration that AI is actually a relatively complex thing. And what makes it complex is it's infinite in a lot of ways. It's like, what can't it do? I mean, now there's limitations, obviously, and it gets better and better and better. But how do you tell somebody, well, just it can do anything. Just tell it. Just ask it. And I think that almost causes paralysis for individuals. They're like, I don't even know where to really begin with that. And so what we're seeing is that there's an initial wave of training that kind of happens, and then it just kind of peters out or falls off. And it's not, and I don't think it's that necessarily people don't want to take advantage of it, but they're not making the connection. Not making the connection of how do I integrate this thing into my day-to-day work in order to get real results, because I'm already really busy. I'm already really being asked to do more than I've ever had to do. And now you want me to stop and talk to this thing to make my life better. I don't even have time to talk to myself. And so it's like, I don't know. There's definitely a disconnect there. And I think what ends up happening is the companies are like, well, we spent $30 per person per employee per year, and we bought all this thing, and only 10% of the people are using it. Oh boy, we gotta restart. So that definitely is a miss that we see. And so using AI as our example here, I think you're gonna see where there's a little bit more hand holding that's necessary to have employees make those connections. And I think it also includes things that aren't even necessarily related to training, but have to be incorporated into the training. And that's things like project planning, change management, communication. Those are all things that, how do you want us to use it? What are the rules at using this? What is this thing connected to? When do we want to use it? And so there's a lot more to that. And with that, the conversations that we're having with our clients are much more deep and much more intimate in a lot of ways, because we're really getting down to, okay, what are the things that you're trying to solve, and identifying, hey, what are the challenges the things that are labor intensive, that are time consuming, that you know that they can leverage AI to use to help alleviate those challenges. And so we're kind of having to walk through all that sort of stuff and say, what is getting in the way? Why are people not adopting it? What guardrails have you put in place? A huge issue is around data. AI will quickly surface the quality of your data. And you may think, boy, this thing's terrible, when in the reality is it's the quality of the data that's in there. And you have to kind of work through that. And there's data governance issues. And then there's a lot of stuff related to security that has to be taken into consideration as well too. So these are all conversations that come up and what we're talking with organizations, just to help them on that journey. And I'll talk a little bit more later, I think, a little bit about sort of that journey and what does that look like for employees in general. So Tiffany, I'll give it back to you from that standpoint.
So it sounds like, AI adoption isn't about just typing in the box, right? Maybe prompting, maybe how to, summarize my emails, but there's all these other skills, project management, security, data, in order to do it right. And so it's not even about just saying, what do I need to learn? It's what do you want to do with it? And Callum dropped in we're saying that right, Callum dropped in here that it's a large toolbox and we don't even know how to use them. So it's about starting with, what is the use case? How do we want to use it? Then, okay, what are all the skills that we need? Exactly, need, opportunity analysis, then implementation and adoption will bring value. Great point, Jay. So Amy, to Tynan's point, we see that organizations are rolling AI out. They're really fast to do it, and then they're not seeing adoption. So what do you think causes that disconnect? And how can people sort of encourage adoption?
Yeah. It's a great question. So One of the interesting insights that came up on a conversation the other day with an organization we're helping through this journey is the idea that, AI in and of itself can be so human. And yet it's a tool. And I think organizations, by and large, initially think of it truly as any other tool rollout, right? Any other new software package, a new project management software is coming online, where any of that. But the reality is, to truly adopt AI, it requires behavior change. And it's such a softer side to the implementation that I think we've had to do in other kind of tool set rollouts before. And so there's sort of three key themes that we've seen in successful rollouts. The first is starting with the leadership messaging at the top. Organizations that see successful AI adoption have leaders who come out very transparently and say, look, we need to get AI as a core enabler in our organization because it's going to help you do your jobs better, faster, take on a heavier workload, and not burn out. And that's our goal of adopting AI. It's not to replace your jobs. It's not to try and cut down on our costs on the long term. It's to really help us collectively be more efficient and effective at the work that we do. And so I think starting with that messaging from the top can go such a long way to assuaging any fears of the unknown or fears around intent around what happens to me and my role, which is a totally normal reaction anytime a new tool or technology is introduced. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is focused around a skills gap. At this point, given the rate of change, given the press coverage, given, where I would say a solid 2 years into AI coming up in every conversation that I personally have, I don't know about the rest of you, people understand what AI is in theory, but they don't necessarily fully understand how that translates to their role, their job in a very practical way. And so they get it. They know that they can enter a prompt into this chat box and it can give them feedback that maybe will help shortcut what would have otherwise taken them a longer period of time. But how that prompt is different for someone in marketing operations versus someone in IT who's a developer versus someone who sits in a cybersecurity organization versus someone who is a sales representative, wildly different. And so I think we've now gotten to a place where the most successful organizations are not just doing AI 101 training, but really making it a very hands-on practical experience so that each individual person can get a sense of where the activities that they could use AI to make their personal workflows on a day-to-day basis easier. And so that's the second area. The third is around the rollout. And so again, it's not as simple as the Field of Dreams reference. If you build it, they will come. No, some organizations have done that, and that's not proven to be successful. They've said, "Yep, we bought the licenses; they're available. Good luck." That has not yielded utilization, ROI on that investment, and most importantly, efficiency gains from an operational perspective to fuel the growth of their businesses. So where we see success is in organizations who really think, holistically about the stakeholders who need to be involved from the leadership all the way through. What are the guardrails of acceptable practices for use of company data and prompting mechanics, to what are we going to measure on an ongoing basis to hold people accountable to the utilization of this new technology that we've invested in. And so that's really where what I was speaking to earlier, that process and softer change management side of things really come in to make the world of difference for organizations that want to see true adoption of AI in their organizations.
And you bring up a good point, and Tynan mentioned it too. If you've got, let's say 1,000 employees and you're paying $30 per employee per year, per month, I mean, the expense adds up. And so it is really important that there's adoption. And Tynan, to Amy's point, it's not just taking one class and suddenly you know how to use it, because it is so different and so varied. So can you walk us through examples of how this journey begins and what we're seeing from a training perspective with our customers?
Mhm. Yeah, sure. So there's definitely a theme that I think plays out in a roadmap for how organizations can help train individuals to get ready. And it does start off with, and I don't want to overlook this because it does get overlooked a little bit, is if you haven't done what is AI kind of thing in this sort of baseline, that is sort of important. So to sort of baseline. So don't take it for granted and assume that everybody just knows. So, but the table stakes or the entry point into all of this is the ability to use the application effectively, safely, and within the company guidelines and all that kind of stuff, which is all determined by the organization. There's also, I would say, within that, it's really important. Your employees may be using AI today and talking about your company through AI without being in a protected space. And so, meaning that they're not using Copilot where it's not learning from your data, or you're not using an enterprise grade product, either through ChatGPT or Gemini. So I'd put that out there that, if you don't have guidelines, but you are letting people use free and open versions, probably need to reel that in a little bit. But when we talk about AI, I'm going to break it, the training, I'm going to break it down into three different groups. Okay. And I'm going to start with first, let's just call it the general population or the general employees. And I think the general employees, it all starts with their ability to understand how to write prompts and, you know, writing and crafting appropriate prompts. And that is slightly different and sometimes really different depending on the large language model that they're using. How you prompt, as an example, in Copilot Pro is different than how you would prompt inside of Gemini or ChatGPT. So understanding those differences is really important. And then the structure and how you craft the prompts is really important in order to get the best possible result from that. So one of the ways that we do that is by walking through people through workshops where we walk them through the fundamentals of AI, understanding the 7 key types of prompts, and then working them through a workshop where they can actually take a business use case and something that's very challenging and write an effective prompt that hopefully helps solve that. And so that's sort of we affectionately call it a promptathon. And what that does is it connects the dots from, this concept of AI to how do I apply it to work, right? And how do I use it effectively? Then kind of start your stopwatch at that point. 60 to 90 days from there, what's going to end up happening is that they're going to advance to the next level, which is how do I build low-level agents, right? Or basic agents. And so they're going to start building AI agents, whether that's using things like Copilot Studio Lite or the free tools that are available inside of ChatGPT or GEMS inside of Gemini, as an example. And that's really around, creating those agents and how do they connect them to data sources or processes or other systems. And so making that connection. Now that may continue, and some of those employees may go on to more of a technical aspect, but they're going to want to know how to do the basic stuff within the guidelines that your IT department and company policy has set. But where I think the next phase comes into is there's a lot of talk within the technical industry around everybody's going to have 8 to 10 agents, right? So now you not only have physical employees, but now you have virtual employees, right? And you have these agents that are living out there. And I anticipate that there's going to be a need for training and understanding of how do I manage agents. I have these things off there doing their thing and they're running and doing stuff. How do I do that? And that likely is going to be yet another instance where there's this blending of people skills, management, leadership concepts that have to be applied towards this digital agent or this intern or thing that you have running, right? So that's coming. I don't know if that's 6 months after or whatever, but I can tell you, you've got 8 or 10 of these things. You're going to have to know how to manage them and how to keep them on task and making sure that they're meeting the expectations. Uh, then let's talk about company training. So now, if we look at the company as a whole, then it's really how do I get to the thing that is going to have the greatest impact to our organization? And part of training your employees is you're building a pipeline of ideas and concepts that AI can be applied to. Because many of you may work for organizations that have a AI center of excellence within it. And the center of excellence's job within IT is to identify those key items that will have the biggest impact leveraging AI. And so they're bubbling those ideas up. And then how does that work through the pipeline to really have an impact? And as an example, there's a cruise line that we've done business with that one of their big things was food waste, and they built AI agents in order to analyze food consumption and food waste and menu items and all that sort of stuff, and bringing in alignment with ensuring that they have the right amount of food on the right nights or the right times of day in order to meet the needs of the customer, but more importantly, reduce the amount of waste. And they saved millions of dollars in food waste by having this thing churning through data that is, massive amount when you think of the number of people on a cruise ship that happens every week. So that's identifying a use case and taking that use case and then applying AI to that. And that's one of the ways that we help organizations as well. Then I would say the last part is really from a technology standpoint, and certainly there is, using AI or building your own LLMs or whatever. There is that technical aspect, but where I see the most interest and need is around security, because a lot of people have a lot of concerns about AI related to security, but also leveraging AI to help them monitor from a security aspect and going through security logs and finding patterns and all that kind of stuff. And then certainly around data. I can't say this enough. AI will get to bad data faster than anybody else. And you don't want you have to have good data governance, you have to have good data policies, data entry, all that stuff. And we're all plagued by that issue. I don't think anybody's immune. But I would say security and data from a technology standpoint, that's where I see the most. And so it's the training is definitely very practical. It's very focused on the job role that's out there and being very specific about how you would use AI in this use case. And the more you connect that, the better the adoption rates are and the better the use of that product would be. And also I would say too, there's another thing that's definitely becoming evident is how do I work in a multi LLM model? Because I can tell you we're seeing a surge of, hey, we use Copilot and Perplexity. We use Copilot and Notebook LM. We use Gemini and we use Notebook LM. And they want to know, when do we use it versus this? And what are the use cases? So that's another thing that's starting to come up. And it's not just a single LLM world. It's what's the right LM for this use case for my specific role and what I'm doing from a workload standpoint.
Very interesting. I love that you said that employees are probably using ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude. People are using it, and if they're not using it based on your guidelines and your rules, then they might be using it ineffectively or inappropriately. Uploading company financial data. So one thing is if they're using something that isn't sanctioned or doesn't have guardrails. But then if you implement something and it has access to all of your data, how are you securing that? It was a really funny conversation that we had at a Microsoft event where they had deployed this great AI agent using their own data and their own internal SharePoint. And one of the things that people were finding were executive salaries, HR reports, things that probably shouldn't have been accessible to your point, Tynan, AI will go find that data. So really making sure that you're locking it down and using it securely, and you have protocols. And I want to talk to the change aspect of this. Amy, you've mentioned multiple times that there's a behavior side, and I'm going to also drop a quick poll to see how you guys are feeling, because one of the biggest things that we saw is, bear with me, well, technical difficulties with our polls, is that change fatigue is real. People are just feeling burnt out. They are feeling a ton of change fatigue. And, how are organizations sustaining this momentum and preventing that burnout and that fatigue? Looks like, yeah, we've got a couple people overwhelmed. Most are surviving, holding steady. No, not anyone particularly thriving. It's the beginning of the year. It's hard to feel like you're thriving in the first month of the year. But yeah, we feel you. Yeah. So we're seeing in here too. It's just overwhelmingly in our poll data, in our surveys, we were seeing that overwhelmingly people are surviving. They're hanging in there. But it's a lot. There's a lot of change. So let's talk through how do you manage that? How do you handle that today?
Yeah. So managing change and change fatigue is definitely something that can be done. I think a lot of it comes from the perspective at which the organization views change. There's a very famous phrase, the only constant is change, right? And I think the organizations that embrace that and embed that into their culture are the ones where, employees feel like there's sustained momentum and it's a program. It's not just a burst of activity. We're going to do all these new things, new, and then it kind of falls off of a cliff. And a lot of that, whether people have kind of taken a step back to realize it or not, has to do with the culture of an organization. And so really understanding and documenting and in many ways quantifying the capacity for an organization, and outlining the components of their culture is a really helpful first step to sort of audit how much capacity is there for our employees to absorb what is another initiative or another change. And then once you have an understanding of the cultural norms of an organization, then you can develop very intentional phased rollouts to pilot, start small, figure out what parts of the organizations have greater appetite for change, that have a higher propensity for early adoption, that then have great communication skills to serve as change agents throughout an organization, so that as you roll out a new initiative, it's not new to everyone all at once, but you take a more measured pilot, test, learn approach, roll it out to another segment of the population, and beyond until it's fully scaled, so that the adoption is successful. And throughout all of that, organizations that really thrive in this approach to managing change not only understand and have a really great self-assessment of the company's culture. They have a detailed phase approach to rollout, but they also have a really solid communication strategy. And so, again, in the absence of information is where fear starts to creep in, and uncertainty and unknowns. And so when organizations communicate clearly, consistently, and constantly, people actually have a much greater aptitude for that change. Confusion is where things really kind of can go off the rails. And it's that clarity that helps reduce change fatigue, because people feel like they're in the loop. They know what's going on. They know what's coming next. They know what they're supposed to be doing. They know what they're being measured on. All of those things. That clarity really helps reduce change fatigue from our experience and some of the feedback that we've gotten from our customers who we work with through some of these kind of culture audits and planning of initiative rollouts as well.
That's a really strong point too. You need to sort of understand a benchmark for like, where's your organization now? Can they
Mhm.
handle this change? And then also understanding, is it being communicated well? Do people feel like they don't know what's happening? Are they scared? And I think that having those audits helps people feel comfortable with saying things that maybe they wouldn't say directly to their manager. And so you kind of get a feel for, are there gaps in communication skills? Are there gaps in the technical skills that people really don't understand what they should be doing? And so that's a great point to benchmark that. And then Tynan, when we're talking about change management, there are sort of your typical change management classes for change managers. But how are you seeing this across organizations who are training different people on how to manage change?
Mhm. Yeah. So how they're managing change, or at least training around management training, I think first of all is understanding that it's more than just the change agents type thing, or the people who are in charge of leading the change. Because the reality is you've got, the directives that come down from the top, and you've got the employees who are expected to, you know, adopt it. But then you have this middle layer of people, the middle management, who their job is to translate this initiative into reality and to be able to execute against that. And that's more than just technical aptitude. It's or understanding the technology, or they have to be able to understand, how do I translate this initiative into reality, so that we can meet the expectations, and that we can, whether it's realizing the ROI, realizing a better efficiency if it comes through AI, whatever it is. So it's more about there's more of, I don't know, maybe like a cohort, sort of this cohort approach where it's like a series of courses that things that are training that people need in order to take them on a journey, because it is not just this one thing and you're one and done. So it might be things around, how to, execute on projects. It might be around change management, could be around communication, and all of those are really important at that middle layer, who are tasked with making it happen. I think also the mix of the training changes a little bit as well too. Uh, there might be different types of training approaches depending on what the topic is. Not everything has to be taught with the same broad brush, and everything has to be just this way. So I think the training mix and how you execute against that, and maybe it's putting in an internal training academy kind of thing, where you have this sort of progression that people go through over a period of time. One thing I do see a lot of is around the need for um, tailoring slash maybe customizing, depending on what term you want to use. And that's really just around, specifically, here's my business challenge, here's what we're trying to accomplish. And there isn't just one thing or one course or one training event that solves that. So how do you help us tailor something that meets our needs and uses our real world examples or use cases or whatever to make it real and give it that stickiness. Um, so that certainly is something that I'm seeing uh, change quite a bit. Um, and more and more, we're seeing too, hey, how effectively can people communicate? There's this concept of influencing without authority, right? And you may not always be in a position to just dictate the way things are going to be. And so how do you gain that trust? How do you gain, um, the ability to influence how things go and how things turn out? And certainly there's tools that help with that. There's approaches and skill sets. And, just like everything, your leadership and management is a learned skill. It is not something that we're all innately born with, or some people are born with. There certainly are personalities that lend itself to be people who gravitate towards leadership roles, but leadership and management and all the skills that go within that, not just technical aptitude, but all the other skill sets, are learned. And they're learned over time. They're learned through experience. They're learned through trial and error. And at the middle management and leadership capacity, unfortunately, some of those lessons learned impact employees, or impact people, or impact the company that we work for. So, companies really want to make sure that they're spending that time with those individuals to really improve those skill sets so that they can ensure that the outcomes of the initiatives are making its way all the way through, and it's avoiding fatigue, which can be really difficult. I mean, change fatigue is a very real thing, and if it's constant and you're not taking that in consideration, you'll lose good people along the way, and having high turnover rates and all that stuff is a real problem. So I think that's sort of the change that we're seeing, is that it's more than just um, the technical aptitude and skill sets. It's all these other things that are equally as important and are in your quiver or your toolbox of being a leader in order to be able to successfully implement these things.
I think it's interesting what I've been seeing evolve, and I was talking to our head of leadership, Dr. Jay Pugh, recently, is that I think companies are leaning into leadership training much stronger now, because the IT skills are one thing, those like hard skills, but then this management, this middle management needs to really understand there's no longer a because I said so or just do it. There has to be a different way of communicating why we're doing change. And so a lot of companies have started investing, and we're seeing our customers invest in these cohorts. And he was telling me about this 5-year cohort program that helps leaders grow into. And to your point, Tynan, they included things like Six Sigma training. So, they know that as they're doing digital transformation, they need communication skills, they need empathy, they need, so these soft skills that we're familiar with, as well as process skills or efficiency skills, as well as maybe some technical skills. So it is interesting seeing that organizations are really adopting a long-term leadership planned cohort model. And that's probably really important, because what we also found in our research is that 75% of the people we surveyed in middle management are feeling burnt out. So much so that over half of Gen Z do not want to become managers. So we are seeing that the middle managers feeling the burnout because they have to take directives from the top, make it work on the bottom. Maybe they don't understand the why all the time. They're getting complaints from the bottom. They're getting complaints from the top. So it is a really tricky role to be in. And I think the younger generation are saying, not for me. No, I don't want to be there. So how do we, what does the future of management look like in this scenario? Amy, I'll ask you that.
Oh man, like a broad question here.
Dust off your crystal ball.
So, I mean, I actually think Tynan hit on it a little bit earlier, in that, like, the future of management is that everyone is a manager in this world of AI. Every single one of us, regardless of our title, regardless of our formal authority, informal authority, we manage the output of AI LLM models, AI agents that we build, et cetera. And that's only going to increase over time. And so whether you're formally a manager or not, you have to have some of these skills that we're not born with. The communication, the requirements gathering, the requirements articulation, the idea that you have to be able to articulate a business case or a plan to set clear objectives and understand how you want to measure someone to those objectives. Like, those are skills that I think historically had been reserved for people who had a certain amount of tenure and got themselves into a managerial role. And, crisping those skills for folks who continue to have that position will be important, as they always have been. But I think more universally, everyone could benefit from gaining some of the kind of manager 101 skill sets, because whether formally, informally, or just between you and your ChatGPT instance, like, you're going to be managing the work of others. And so I think that's where it becomes really important to have that lens in any organizational context, where you're thinking about, who's the right cohort of employees to get some of these skills. It really should be everyone. And so, yeah, I think hopefully that answers what is the future of management? It's everyone's a manager, regardless of whether you formally are a manager or not. That's the reality I think we're looking at.
That is really interesting. Our head of AI actually calls AI an amazing intern. And so he refers to AI as an amazing intern. They can do a lot of stuff, but you have to train them. You have to coach them. They're not always going to get it right. Sometimes they get it really wrong. And so you almost even need to be, to your point, a manager of AI. And then to Tynan, to your point, there's so many different AI agents that are going to be built. I also think that it isn't necessarily a lateral climb anymore where you're climbing up the ladder and I'm going to be a manager. Now there's almost like a corporate lattice where maybe there's new roles that are being created that you can cross skill. And so you have like adjacent capabilities and adjacent skill sets, and then suddenly you're really interested in these new roles. So you can almost reskill for those roles as opposed to just having to go up and down. And maybe managing AI agents is better for some personalities than managing people. So it'll be very interesting to see. Tynan, are you seeing this shift in leadership in organizations and how they're skilling people, especially for managers? I know you spoke to it a little bit earlier.
Yeah, in general, we are seeing an increase in the training that organizations are doing related to leadership and management of their individuals. So that is growing and it continues to grow. And I think, if I use it in AI, at the fundamental level, when you're prompting, you're providing a set of instructions. You're telling the AI how to do something. And if you can't effectively communicate in your normal life, you're likely to have challenges communicating with AI in general and setting clear expectations. And so the skill set doesn't go away. And I think that's why we see a lot of, there's a lot of requests for communication training, and that manifests itself in a lot of ways. It's not just, hey, go to a great communication course and you're done. It has different flavors, it has different names, and as an example, influencing without authority is in a lot of ways communication, and effective communication at different levels. So we're seeing that definitely leadership training in general is growing. And it is growing across that middle manager layer as well too. I think that's really important. It continues to be important. There's one of my favorite books that is out there. There's a book called Building a Leadership Driven Company. Forget the author exactly, but it's one of my favorite books, and it's really creating every employee as a leader within the organization and building a leadership pipeline, which is really important. And I think in the age of AI, where you're going to be managing agents, that's going to be important. You're not probably going to run into some of the same issues that you do with managing normal employees, but I'm certain that there will be a whole different set of issues that you'll have to address that you will come to roost later. So
Hallucinations and such.
yeah, there's going to be something. Um, and the reality is too is we don't really know, right? I mean, at the end of the day, what we think today is likely not going to be true maybe tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day kind of thing, because AI is changing so much. So I think, we just have to kind of wait and see what comes with that. As I mentioned earlier, it's very common for organizations, and we're seeing it more and more where these cohorts are being built. Or an internal corporate academy, as I mentioned earlier, where there's sort of this journey that you're going to go on, and they lay out, we lay out the training that is going to be taken, and it's a blend. It's always a blend of stuff. It's not just a specific topic. To your point earlier, Tiffany, sometimes it's Six Sigma followed by influencing without authority with maybe business analysis. I don't know. There's you name the combination, and somewhere in there we throw in technology. So that's very common. I would say also we're seeing a real surge in interpersonal communication as well too, and interpersonal communication skills. I think one of the greatest courses that's out there, or just training in general, is understanding personality types, right? And specifically, we refer to them as social styles. And I think understanding how people communicate, how they like to receive information, what communication styles do they lead with, and understanding that makes us better leaders and makes us better managers because we have to meet them where they are. We can't necessarily just say, hey, I communicate this way, get on board or get out. That doesn't really work. That's not effective. So that's a tool or training that we do see quite a bit of as well too. Emotional intelligence obviously is, I guess we say a lot. EQ is as important, if not more important, than IQ. From that standpoint. And then the ability to build trust and safety. I think that's something that employees really are concerned about, and making sure that their leaders are there to, from a servant leadership standpoint, and helping them be successful and making them feel safe and feel valued. Those are all really important things that, especially right now with all of the unknown related to AI, I think that's even more important today.
I love that you mentioned social styles, and we're going to wrap up in the next 10 minutes. If anyone has any questions, please drop them in the chat. I'm going to queue up a couple more questions for Amy and Tynan. But the social styles is very interesting because it also takes the personal out of it, because the social styles are 5 different types of styles of people. So some people are very creative. Some people are, they want to be just the facts. Some people are very detail oriented. And I know that even working on my team, because we all know each other's social styles, I can be very big picture and, oh, let's do this. And then someone else will be very detail oriented and they'll say, Tiffany, that's you're being a little yellow right now. And I'll be like, oh, well, we need a little bit more red in here. You kind of say the color as opposed to the personal attribute. Instead of saying you're being really bossy, you can say, oh, let's tone down the red a little bit. That's very driving. So it's just very interesting how you communicate with people differently based on their styles. So as we're wrapping up, Amy, any key takeaways that you're seeing for people who are doing this well, from people who are really willing in this digital change and transformation, implementing AI, and really doing a great job?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've hit on a lot of the pieces throughout today's conversation. Ultimately, we're seeing the organizations have the most success when they're kind of connecting the dots across not only the technological elements, but also the process and the leadership side. And so I think making sure that people understand that it's not just rolling out a new tool and giving them technical training on it, that for it to be successful, it really requires, a more comprehensive view. That in and of itself is a giant predictor on AI adoption success. The second key observation I would say is really around getting quickly to real workflows, real practical AI use cases at the individual level, and giving people that hands-on experience to really envision how AI can quickly become part of their daily workflows that will ultimately translate faster to real efficiency gains for them and for the organization. And then third, I think, is around really acknowledging that it's a journey. So you're not just going to do one training and be set up. The rate of technological change is too fast. The need to consistently upskill and evolve your personal managerial style, again, whether you formally manage others or are looking ahead to manage AI agents and effective use of AI, it's going to have to be a journey on training and upskilling, and not just a one-time event. And so I would say those are really the 3 key themes or observations that I've had in speaking with customers that are seeing success in their AI adoption journeys thus far.
The hands-on part, Tynan, can you speak a little bit to what you mentioned, a promptathon as part of the journey, and it is such a unique experience. Can you talk, what is a day in the life of the promptathon? What does that actually look like in practice? Because I think it's really interesting the way that we do those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what does a day in the life of a promptathon look like? Well, it starts off with, first of all, we don't assume that anybody knows anything about AI from the get-go. I guess that's where it really all begins. So there's usually a short period of time that's spent on baselining what is AI and just basic understanding of that. Now, that may be slightly different depending on the organization that we work with. Some people want us to go a little more in depth. Some want less depth in those particular areas. So we start there. Then the next part is really around how to structure a proper prompt, how to write prompts, what are the common types of prompts that are used. Then the next, before that's usually in the morning, right before lunch, we set the expectation for the actual promptathon part, which is, hey, after lunch, we're going to break you into teams. We typically break them into teams by common job role or departments. And then we say, okay, when you come back from lunch, you're going to identify 5 business challenges that you run into that you think AI may be able to solve. You'll go and break into groups. You'll decide as a group which those 5 are. Then we break everybody apart and say, okay, now go write prompts to based on what you've learned. Use one of the styles, and write those prompts, and then iterate and see if it solves a solution. Then come back, share your ideas with the group. The groups bubble up what they think are the great ones or the good ones. And then we typically, if time allows, we'll try and get people to present how they approached it. What was the business challenge? What was the outcome? How did they get there? Let's see the prompt. Let's see your iterations, all that sort of stuff. So it really goes from 0 to hero in one day, as far as that journey that somebody goes through, as far as how do I take a concept that I really didn't understand to applying it to a real business scenario. So that's typically what happens in a promptathon. And it does depend, as I mentioned, there are a lot of instances where we're now doing multiple LLM models as well too. So we're also talking about when to use one versus the other.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Really appreciate the conversation. Tynan, Amy, appreciate your insights. We will follow up, check your email for this recording, and we'll also have a link to download the full report with all of our findings. So please feel free to download it and share it. So thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.